Welcome back to the long-awaited second episode of SKOL the Bowl with Jaycee Goossen. I'm glad to be back. I really am. It's been a while since I've been able to record, so um, let's just jump right into it. The last time that I recorded, I promised that I would go into the coaching staff with the Vikings once it was all set. Well, lots more than that has happened. Since the last time I recorded, the entire coaching staff has been set and we've gone into free agency. So, what I've decided is I'm going to actually do this in three parts. I'm going to take a look at the defense, going to take a look at special teams, and then we're going to take a look at offense. And I'm doing that because we can take a look at the coaching staff as well as the recent new signings that we have acquired. And then hopefully by the time I get to the offense, maybe we have one or two key free agent signings to talk about, because as of right now, all the splash players have been on defense. So let's just jump right into it. The biggest name that comes to mind when we talk about the defensive side of the football for the Minnesota Vikings is going to be Ed Donatell, because he's the defensive coordinator. However, I do want to start with Mike Pettine, because although his official title with the Vikings is going to be the assistant head coach, he's a defensive guy. Him and Kevin O'Connell have crossed paths twice in their careers already. He was with O'Connell when he was a player with the New York Jets, and then when they were both coaching at one point in Cleveland. So Pettine is not new to the NFC North. He was with the Chicago Bears on the defensive side of the ball as a senior defensive assistant for them. He has 28 seasons overall of coaching experience, and then he's also been recently in Green Bay with the Packers as their defensive coordinator. So he has most recently worked with the biggest splash signing of Minnesota Vikings since Darius Smith. In fact, in Darius's press conference that he just had after his signing, he quoted Mike Pettine and Mike Smith, the outside linebackers coach, as basically the entire, or not the entire, but about 90%, it seems, of the reason that he ended up signing here in Minnesota, because it just felt like family. It immediately felt familiar to him having both of his guys there. So we'll get into Mike Smith in just a second here, but Mike Pettine, assistant head coach, going to probably be more focused on the defensive side. Definitely a guy that will be interesting to see what he does exactly, because of the fact that Kevin O'Connell is a first-year head coach. This is the first time he's ever been given anything close to that title at this high of a level. I think that having Mike Pettine, somebody that he's familiar with and somebody who has been in this position and has been in many positions across the league, is going to be so huge for Kevin. Somebody to lean on. In the end, he's still the guy who makes that final decision, but having somebody who can kind of whisper in his ear and be like, hey, I was in a similar situation once and maybe it didn't work out, or it did work out this way, so let's look at it from this angle. That is awesome. Super huge. So originally was a little bit worried about this hire, but I've come to warm up to it. Let's move over now to Ed Donatell, who's the defensive coordinator. The best way to describe Ed Donatell, to be completely honest, is going to be Vic Fangio 2.0, right? So this guy, he has had 31 seasons in the NFL. I mean, he's been to 3 Super Bowls. He was a part of the Denver back-to-back champions in 1997 and 98. And he's a big defensive backs guy, which it's going to be interesting for Vikings players, because the last, big defensive guy that came in here who was mostly defensive backs is obviously Mike Zimmer. So it kind of feels like a very familiar hire in that regard, just because of how much he cares about that aspect of the defensive side of the ball. So going to be super interesting there. He's been with the Denver Broncos under Vic Fangio, so that's why we're kind of calling him the Fangio 2.0. He's been his defensive coordinator over there for 3 seasons now, until now, obviously coming here to be Kevin O'Connell's defensive coordinator. So super, super, super interesting stuff. He has gotten a lot of tips from Fangio, but he's been around, as I said, for 31 seasons in the NFL. So he kind of has had his hands in a bunch of different areas on the side of the ball for the defense. He's mostly been with defensive backs, but he's also done some work with linebackers at times. He worked as Green Bay's defensive coordinator for a couple years, and I, I'm very excited about this hire specifically for Kevin O'Connell. Again, mostly because of the amount of experience that he brings with his 31 years of NFL coaching, and he even did more in college. So this is a very, very seasoned guy when it comes to knowing how to talk to players, knowing how to get the best out of them on that side of the ball. You pair a guy like him with, again, a Mike Pettin, who has, a very similar resume when it comes to the amount of experience that both these guys have had. You start to understand why Kevin O'Connell wants to build his defensive staff like this, right? Because he's an offensive guy. He played quarterback in the league. He was a quarterback's coach at one point, and then offensive coordinator. And that's all he's done in the NFL. He has had plenty of meetings with defensive guys. I mean, when you are in the NFL and get to that level, the collaboration is so key that it's not like he has no idea what he's doing, but his experience in those chairs and in those discussions are far more lacking. So making a clear decision to go after two guys that have so much experience is so valuable for a person like Kevin O'Connell. So I'm very impressed with this decision to hire both of these guys in these key roles for him. And he obviously made the right call, because let's dig into some of these position coaches here to round out the defensive side of the ball. So we have assistant defensive backs and safeties coach, Roy Anderson. He is in his 16th season in the NFL. This dude is well known around the league. I think the biggest thing that I can say about Anderson is that, your defensive backs and your safety coaches in this staff, as I've already kind of touched on under Ed Donatel, they are going to be the best of the best, just because of the fact that this is another guy who really cares about that aspect specifically of his defense. He's not just going to hand the keys to anybody. So super, super interesting. He was really recently actually with LSU as their defensive analyst when they won the national championship. So he even has like a connection with Justin Jefferson, which I find is like super interesting. But yeah, this is a extremely solid hire, one that kind of didn't jump out to a lot of people, but I personally found it very, very interesting. Just to see who Ed Donatel specifically is handing, the keys over, like I already kind of said. And then we're welcoming back, along with Anderson, Durante Jones. And he was most recently serving as the defensive coordinator and the defensive backs coach at LSU last season, but he was in Minnesota in 2020 as the defensive backs coach. So this is a guy who is coming back into the role that he obviously has already been in. Understands what he needs to do, understands what he's been doing at both a collegiate and a pro level. He's got some ties to Wisconsin. There's a lot of guys on these staffs that have some ties to the state across the Mississippi, but I'm not holding that against anybody by any means. The cool thing about a majority of the coaches that Kevin O'Connell has brought in, and this is another one here with Durante Jones, is just the experience that these guys have, right? So this is another guy who has spent over 5 years. This is his sixth season in the NFL, coaching on the defensive side of the ball, specifically in the room and the realm of cornerbacks. So welcome back, Durante Jones. Very excited about that for sure. Let's get into linebackers, because Mike Smith is the outside linebacker and pass rush specialist, and your inside linebackers coach is going to be Greg Minuski. Now, these two gentlemen, as I've already kind of hinted at, are so key to what Ed Donatel and Kevin O'Connell are going to be doing on the defensive side of the ball. Mike Smith, alongside with Mike Pettin, was heavily focused on in the Zadarius Smith presser as the best coach, arguably, that Zadarius has had as a pro in the NFL. Just the things that he brings to the table as far as explaining how the game works to these players to fit within the scheme that they want to use, finding weak points where they can use these players' strengths specifically to disrupt the game. Pettin and Smith are basically the masterminds behind figuring out that Zadarius was able to move around wherever necessary on, the defensive line or within the formation, as far as the linebackers go, even to pinpoint a weak spot and just let him wreak havoc. And then next to him is Greg Minuski, who's the inside linebackers coach and has been coaching for 32 years. I'm blown away, quite honestly, by the staff that Donatel was able to put together. Now, Greg Minuski was most recently in the University of Kentucky for the past 2 seasons, but it's super interesting to me because he actually played for the Vikings from 91 to 93. So super, super cool dynamic there. The fact that you get a seasoned coach who has been, defensive coordinator at times, obviously worked with linebackers, and then also was a linebacker for the team that he is now coaching for. There were some things that Kevin O'Connell talked about in his introductory presser that I can't really remember if I got into in my original episode, about wanting to make sure that Vikings legends and Vikings alumni were around the building and that they felt like they could have an impact on this new team, because every year is a new team. But this new generation of Vikings is probably the best way to put it. So hiring a former Viking on your staff is, I think, a fantastic way to, step up and speak with your actions. He's obviously not just saying it; he means it. So, very, very, very interesting to me. Arguably, my favorite hire is the Chris Rumpf hire on the defensive line. This dude was in Chicago as their defensive lines coach last year. And he's been coaching in the league for about 20 years. He's been coaching for close to another 20 in college. The dude knows the defensive line. Um, I mean, do I even have to mention Akeem Hicks and how dominant he is? Obviously, he's no longer on Chicago after the moves that they made, but Khalil Mack and what he had been doing for them. I mean, this is a man who I am so excited to see take into his hands the combination of Armon Watts and what he was doing towards the end of the season. Um, Her, Dalvin Tomlinson and what he can be as a run stuffing true defensive tackle in a 3-4 system, rushing the passer with guys like a Darius Smith and a Daniil Hunter. I am just blown away, quite honestly, by the fact that we were able to hire Chris Rumph. It seems like one of those moves that nobody is really going to notice unless they are just a hardcore fan that is like bleeding purple and gold, right? But hey, that's why I'm here. So now you know. But yeah, basically, if you're going to be excited about one guy on this new coaching staff, I would argue it's got to be Chris Rumph, and we have been spoiled in Minnesota when it comes to our defensive line coach. Obviously, Andre Patterson is, in my opinion, like the GOAT when it comes to defensive line coaches. So Chris Rumph has big shoes to fill. But I think honestly, if there's going to be anybody who is able to do it, I would say it's going to be him. I mean, the guy has been everywhere. He's seen practically everything. Trust me, this is a guy you're going to love. You're going to be hearing his name more than you realize. And then finally, the person that I want to touch on is going to be Sam Sykes. Now, Sam Sykes is the assistant linebackers coach. And we already kind of went over the linebackers, but I want to bring him up again really quick just because Sykes was with the Vikings last year, right? Now, I'm not so much bringing him up because of his title as the assistant linebackers coach. I'm more so bringing him up because this is a decisive move by Kevin O'Connell to not completely clear house. And we'll bring up another name too when I go over the offensive side of the ball in a couple episodes. But keeping somebody who has continuity with players, especially when one of the best players on your team is Eric Kendricks in your middle linebacker, who ended up finishing this last season with 143 tackles, 5 sacks, 2 interceptions, potentially maybe still having Anthony Barr on the team. I think it's super unlikely, but it's possible. Basically having, as I already stated, continuity, but knowing that it is so important to be able to, when you're bringing in a new scheme like a 3-4, have someone that can talk candidly with guys that are already on this team and perhaps put it in terms, or not even terms, but just have rapport with guys as they go through these perhaps a little difficult changes. I just think that is such a smart move by Kevin O'Connell and not necessarily something that every coach would think of. Now, don't get me wrong. I think every new coaching regime knows that it's going to be a struggle for any player that is on the team that they inherit. But I don't think that they necessarily would find one or two coaches that are new enough to the team that they're not completely established with the old regime, that they're going to have any resentment or find it super weird that you're keeping them on. But also not new enough that, or they were in a, established enough position that they have good enough rapport with the players to make it worthwhile to keep them around. So it's not so much what he brings as far as his experience or what he's doing as a coach, because again, he's an assistant linebackers coach, and there's a specific reason why I didn't bring him up when we were talking about the linebackers. It's because of the fact that he was with the team, and it is not the same thing as your Durante Joneses, because he had it a year away from the team last year. So that is it's a completely different move. So yes, Sam Seifkis, I believe is how you pronounce that. And very, very happy that they were able to find somebody on the staff and figure out that role for a transition, especially with one of the youngest and most important leaders on this team in Eric Kendricks. So now we'll talk about the other two major signings that have happened. That being Jordan Hicks, another interior linebacker who formerly played for the Arizona Cardinals and the Philadelphia Eagles. And then Harrison Phillips, who is a defensive tackle coming in, used to play in Buffalo. Now, Michael Pierce gets cut to make these moves happen. So Harrison Phillips obviously is going to step in right into that hole. And he's not necessarily a guy who you're going to see show up on the sack stat sheet, but he's a run stuffer. And that is something that this team has missed. And that is something that is so important when you bring in a scheme like a 3-4, because 3-4, you have 3 defensive linemen, 4 linebackers, and those outside linebackers, while they're still mostly rushing the passer, they're in a position now where those gaps for the offensive line that they are creating potentially become bigger. So your run game has more opportunities if you're the offense. So why do a 3-4, right? Well, because depending on how you use your scheme, depending on how you develop blitzes and all that kind of thing, it's really not that big of a deal. The majority of defenses these days are kind of running a hybrid 3-4, 4-3 anyways, with the amount of nickel that they're using, just because they need to stay in coverage. This is a passing league now. So the bottom line is really what you need to do is disrupt the passer, right? Well, Harrison Phillips, he's not going to show up necessarily as the guy who takes down the quarterback, but he's going to be able to get a little bit of penetration. He's going to stop offenses from just completely running the football on you constantly, at least right up the middle, or whatever side they place him on with that 3-4. If Delvin Tomlinson per se takes on the true nose tackle position, I'm very excited for this. He's definitely going to be a little bit more raw than Michael Pierce, but Michael Pierce we didn't see much of. I wish him nothing but the best. It's absolutely horrible, the COVID situation, and then him getting injured sucked. Wish we could have figured out a way to keep him on the team, but Harrison Phillips is younger and has potentially an even higher ceiling. Maybe now working with guys like Chris Rumpf under Ed Donatel and Mike Pettin, who can find different ways apparently to, see weaknesses in offenses and put players in specific positions to take advantage of those weaknesses. I'm very excited to see exactly what comes out of the Harrison Phillips signing, because he's an amazing guy. You can tell that if you haven't already listened to his presser. The dude is funny, and he's going to be an insane locker presence. Both of these guys are going to be absolutely huge locker presences. And then the other one is Jordan Hicks, and Jordan Hicks is the only other guy who got above 120 tackles and 2 interceptions this last season. It's him and Eric Kendricks. And, the funny thing was when Kwesi first introduced him, he was like, we stopped a meeting, me KOC, Kevin O'Connell. And Kevin just looked at me and he was like, I didn't like playing against that guy. And, sometimes it's purely as simple as that, right? When a guy gives you that much stress and trouble game planning on the offensive side of the ball, you know that it's going to be a good move. So he was the number one priority for the Vikings. I think it's huge. I think him and Za'Darius are in their own ways Anthony Barr replacements, which is super interesting because Anthony Barr the past couple of years has obviously not done nearly what he has before those last 2 years, and that's due to injury. But Za'Darius is somebody that we'll get into even more in a second here, but a guy who's going to be rushing the passer more often. And Jordan Hicks is going to make Eric Hendricks' job 10 times easier, which is insane because Eric Hendricks is already arguably the best at what he does in the interior of that linebacker core. So being able to have two guys that play coverage so well at that linebacker position and are guys who love to come up and hit people, who have led their teams consistently in tackles, that is massive for the Vikings. I am extremely excited about those two. I'm excited about, we're not really getting into the cap details too much right now because of the latest signing with Za'Darius Smith. The cap details are a little bit murky as far as the Vikings, but I will say that all three of these guys have signed deals that I am absolutely okay with. After the restructures that we were able to make to get the cap room to sign them, I'm not looking at any one of these signings and being like, oh, that's going to cripple us in like a year or two. Now, I'm genuinely really happy that we were able to get these guys at the price that we got them. So that's huge too, winning the bidding battle for sure. So that's those two guys. That was kind of our first, wave. And then there was a hiatus for a little while there. And then we signed Za'Darius Smith. And I've been touching on him in and out, but this is by far the biggest splash signing that we've probably seen in the past year or two for the Vikings, I would say. Formerly a Green Bay Packer, played outside linebacker for them. Dude was an absolute monster. He's coming off his own injury. So him and Daniil, if they are both able to stay healthy, which Za'Darius ended up being healthy enough to play actually in the playoff game that the Packers were in last year. So for some reason, I think a lot of people are kind of forgetting that. He's fine. He passes physical. Daniil's in Europe right now. They're already trying to figure out places where they can go and get in some work before OTAs even begin, which is absolutely awesome. I genuinely believe that Za'Darius Smith and Daniil Hunter, if they can stay healthy for the entirety of the season, are going to form probably a top 3 pass rushing duo in the NFL. When you add on the addition of Harrison Phillips up there, when you see what Armand Watts was doing at the end of the season and how he was learning to get penetration at the position that he's playing, which is insane because he's, again, more of a defensive tackle, nose tackle guy. You have him and then Dalvin Tomlinson. You're starting to piece together a defense that, well, its only worry now is going to be corner, which we're going to get into quite a bit when we start talking about the draft, which is coming up soon and all that stuff. Hopefully there's 1 or 2 signings even maybe that happens. I'd love to see them bring back Pat Pete, but as of right now, the linebackers and the defensive line for this team look great. They look fantastic. And it's not shocking. I mean, Ed Donatel is going to come up with some really fancy stuff that he's going to bring up against offenses. And that Kevin O'Connell is going to be a part of those meetings. And with what he knows as far as, where the NFL is going in offensive styles, I'm going to be very intrigued to see what this defense ends up focusing on when it comes to stopping offensive plays. So massive signings, massive coaching staff put together for the Minnesota Vikings. Very, very excited about the defensive side of the ball. Next episode will most likely be in about a week or so. We shall see. Kind of depends. If it goes on for too long and there's no signings, then perhaps we'll just mold special teams and offensive side of the ball into one full episode. But as of right now, that will be next. So thank you all so much for watching and listening to SKOL with the Ball with Jaycee Goossen. And if you haven't already, make sure that you share the podcast. If you like it, and you're watching it on YouTube, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. I want to hear from them. How can I get better? All that good stuff. And then make sure that you follow me on Twitter as well, both my personal at JC or Jaycee Goossen NFL and SKOL to the Bowl with Jaycee Goossen. And yeah, that's it. I'm really excited to be recording these again. So hopefully you enjoyed, and I will see you all later. As always, SKOL.